This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Here at GoFundMe, we know that everyone has something they care about, but not everyone knows they can do something about it.
I was shocked at the response I got when I started a GoFundMe from my local animal shelter. I raised thousands of dollars, some of that from strangers.
I was feeling really helpless about what was happening in the world and just decided to start a GoFundMe for a mural that I wanted to paint in town. It took less time to set up and start than even opening my paint cans. And now the whole community has something beautiful to look at.
I really wanted to study law, but I couldn't afford the tuition. So I launched my GoFundMe. I got my tuition money, and I got so many comments of support and love. It was just amazing.
Every dollar counts. Every cause counts. GoFundMe helps you make a real difference. Start your GoFundMe today at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe, with actors voicing experiences inspired by our users.
I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Strangers, we have collected a number of stories about haunted highways and roads over the past 4 years. Ghostly hitchhikers, they've made plenty of appearances. And please, we beg you, if you're driving along a lonely road at night, do not offer rides to anyone who seems even the least bit transparent. But there are plenty of other tales out there too. For instance, we found a few news clippings about a spirit-plagued toll road in Virginia. According to the Richmond Times-Dispatch, it was 2002 when a truck driver and a toll booth operator claimed that, quote, 3 flickering points of light on a high bluff were spotted along a local highway. When the truck driver drew closer, he saw what he described as 3 ghostly figures holding torches. The driver reported that 2 more of the figures appeared in front of his truck, and he hit the truck's horn in an effort to, well, we don't know what, because we doubt personally that apparitions are dissuaded by honking. But per the Times-Dispatch, when he arrived at the next toll booth and relayed that shocking encounter, it wasn't actually a shock to the toll booth operator. According to some message board posts that we found, the staff there had been seeing ghostly figures for weeks. And it wasn't just their staff either. Local law enforcement had called in reports as well. The posts claimed that they'd seen even more figures, including headless ones. Now, of course, this was surprising and probably unpleasant, at least when it came to missing heads. But the story never got much coverage, and it's not particularly well known in the area. Other traveling ghosts, though, they've become famous, infamous even, and have been blamed for all sorts of misdeeds. Vehicle malfunctions, crashes, and even deaths. We've told you about the terrifying and even deadly ghost of Florida's I-4 in our episode, The Road. But there is another stretch, over the pond, that deserves our attention. It's a spot where drivers claim that phantom hands have seized control of their vehicles and steered them straight into danger. So, we begin in Dartmoor, England. For those who may be unfamiliar, Dartmoor is in the southwestern portion of the country. It's notable for a number of reasons, including its landscape of tors and moors. Dartmoor is already a well-known setting for the ghostly, strange, and all-around paranormal. It's allegedly the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes's Hound of the Baskervilles. And, as the Skeptic blog notes, quote, alien big cats are said to roam the landscape. Local pubs and manor houses are alleged to be haunted. Some claim that the devil himself once romped across the roofs of the area. But, strangers, it's one particular urban, or perhaps rural is really the word we want here, legend that caught our eye a haunted stretch of road that runs near the village of Postbridge. According to the We Are South Devon news site, it's an area specifically between, quote, Postbridge and Two Bridges on what's now called the B3212. And as the news site reported, quote, since around 1910, drivers and cyclists had allegedly been reporting unusual accidents, the victims reporting that their vehicle had swerved violently and steered off the road. Some described that it was as if something had wrenched the vehicle out of their control. This could happen to cars, motor coaches, cyclists, and even pony and traps. Now, we all know that certain roads are more dangerous than others. It can be a combination of traffic, terrain, signage, and weather, all things that can add up to multiple accidents. But there was one more factor that, for at least 100 years, has cropped up in stories of the now B3212. Some supernatural entity, usually described as a ghost, that forces the vehicles off the road. In rare instances, it's even been blamed for deaths. The earliest reports that we found concerning the road date back to 1921. One article from March of that year ran in the Western Times and covered the tragic death of a doctor who'd been traveling by motorcycle, quote, to an inquest at Postbridge. An issue with one of his wheels had caused the fatal accident. No mention of anything paranormal was brought up there, just the sad report of a man's death as he attempted to attend to his official duties. According to the Daily Mail, the crash involving the doctor who tragically died also involved two children who had miraculously escaped before the fatal accident. Or maybe not so miraculously. The doctor, thinking quickly, ordered the children to jump from the sidecar they'd been riding in before he lost full control of his motorcycle. It's unclear precisely who these children were. News sources vary regarding their identities. That article was written by a reporter named T. Gifford, which we normally would not mention, except that he became a rather prominent character in another story. That article ran in October of the same year in the Dundee Evening Telegraph. It was titled, Gripped by Invisible Hands, and the story was focused almost entirely on a ghostly explanation for a recent crash, the same spot. This one with no fatalities. In an interview with the Telegraph, Gifford explained that a, quote, officer friend of his had an extraordinary experience while riding along the roadway. Gifford claimed that the officer, quote, was riding a motorcycle and stated that he actually felt two large, muscular, hairy hands close over his own hands and force him into the side of the road in spite of his resistance. As a result of this apparently enforced turning movement, the young man was hurt and his bicycle was damaged, end quote. Strangers, don't ask us why bicycle and motorcycle are used interchangeably here, as the invisible hands are obviously the larger issue up for discussion. Anyway, when Gifford quizzed his officer friend about the unseen hands that had gripped the wheel, the officer swore that there had been no other extenuating circumstances, no fog or dangerous conditions that would have caused such a crash. As the officer explained to Gifford and was told to the Telegraph, a pair of hands closed over mine. I felt them as plainly as I ever felt anything in my life. Large, muscular, hairy hands. I fought them for all I was worth, but they were too strong for me. They forced this machine into the edge of the road, and I knew no more until I came to myself lying a dozen feet away on the face of the turf. In this article, much attention is paid to the spot where the crash occurred. Gifford told reporters that a motor coach, that is a bus, though this one looked more like a convertible van in the photos, it had crashed there too, and that there had been at least one serious injury. When he spoke to the Dundee Evening Telegraph, Gifford offered a possible opinion on what his officer friend might have experienced. He explained that as someone, quote, interested in psychic matters, he thought that the two explanations of the matter were elemental or natural spirit, or that of the earthbound spirit of some such person as a murderer. That was one theory, and according to a letter to the editor that we found in the Western Morning News, at least some locals wondered if the invisible force wasn't a pair of hands at all, but rather a magnetic pull, a literal one. A local wrote into the Western Morning News in late October of 1921 to say that they'd experienced, quote, one of these extraordinary swerves in September of that same year, to be precise. The letter writer said that they'd watched a motor coach violently swerve, quote, almost at right angles on the road, which seemed impossible since it was, quote, a long, straight piece of road with no curve and no other traffic, and the motor coach was being slowly and carefully driven. The letter writer got to thinking about it and decided that the cause might be, quote, magnetic rocks, of which there are many on Dartmoor. They hypothesized that the rocks might be jerking the vehicles off their course and that, quote, the steering wheel or handlebars would act as conductors. Now look, we are not magnet experts. Like the Insane Clown Posse, we too have wondered how exactly they work. But according to some geophysical journals that we consulted, and which were honestly above our pay grade, there is quite a bit of magnetic rock in Devon, and thus in Dartmoor. But we could not find anything to indicate that these, quote, magnetic disturbances, as Durham University described them, could send a motorcycle, much less a motor coach, crashing off its course. Now, of course, all of this was frightening enough. Bizarre invisible forces steering drivers off the road against their wills. And magnets are a weird and concerning, if red herring-y, subplot. But this kind of story does tend to have an endpoint, a place where it peters out after a few events, even tragic ones. In Virginia, at that toll booth highway, it was after a few anecdotes. In Dartmoor, it might have been after those initial crashes. It might have been, except for one strange thing. Those invisible hands, they decided to take a turn for the, well, perhaps concrete is not quite the right word. Let's go with visible. Per We Are South Devon, a 1980s-era book on local folklore chronicled another experience on the road. In this book, a historian, Theo Brown, recalled a family story, and she wrote that back in 1924, her mother and father had been parked in a caravan, aka a motorhome, quote, half a mile from the B3212. Her mother, Mrs. Brown, recalled to Theo, at some point in the night, a very uneasy feeling struck us. It seemed that the invisible hands of Dartmoor had come to visit, except they weren't invisible anymore. As I looked up to that little window at the end of the caravan, I saw something moving. And as I stared, I saw it was fingers in the palm of a very large hand with many hairs on the joints in the back of it, clawing up and up to the top of the window, which was a little open. I knew that it wished to do harm to my husband sleeping below. I knew that the owner of that hand hated us and wished harm, and I knew it was no ordinary hand, and that no blow or shot would have any power over it. Mrs. Brown's instinctual response in that moment was to pray. Per We Are South Devon, she also made the sign of the cross, and somehow that seemed to work. The hand slipped away from the caravan window. But that story marked a disturbing shift in the narrative. The frightening spirit, elemental, ghostly, or otherwise, it had taken on a new shape. Mrs. Brown wasn't the only one to claim that the hands had taken on corporeal form. According to the BBC, another unlucky motorcyclist was accosted. The year here is somewhat unclear, but it was in the 1920s, while riding with a passenger on the B3212. Per the BBC, quote, this time the passenger insisted that he saw a large, hairy hand grasped the handlebars and forcibly upset the bike. As best as we can tell, no casualties were reported that time. But hairy hands, they are obviously an issue for any driver, so the road quickly developed and maintained a reputation. All told, there were at least 5 crashes at the B3212 that have shown up in news coverage, and then the brown story of the hands at the window, all which date to the early part of the 20th century. Since then, though, reports have been scattered at best, and with questionable provenance. Several blogs and small news sites claim that there was another hairy hand sighting in 1962, when a woman on vacation had an unfortunate encounter along the road. Per Devon Live, quote, Florence Warwick was driving the route when she stopped the car to look at a map, and she recalled, I looked up and saw a pair of huge hairy hands pressed against the windscreen. I tried to scream, but couldn't. I was frozen with fear. No actual injuries were reported then, or in an alleged 2008 incident that we saw mentioned as well. That time, the details were even more vague. As legendary Dartmoor wrote, a driver on the B3212 claimed that he saw, quote, hairy paws grab his steering wheel in an attempt to force him off the road. The story has popped up just enough, strangers, to stay alive first in the papers, and now on the internet. There it's taken seed and root, and it has spread. TikTokers and YouTubers give us atmospheric videos that show the moors, which are a great setting for anything supernatural, we must say, and that's got to be part of it. Dartmoor is just the right kind of place for the unbelievable to occur. Then there's the element of fear, the idea of losing control of your vehicle, despite your best efforts. It's a chilling concept. It's also something all of us can probably imagine experiencing. But what strikes us is the essential weirdness of the story's evolution. Invisible force, to what seems to be disembodied hairy hands, to what, furry paws? It's like a game of telephone, and no one has ever come up with a very good reason why the hairy hands are what appeared in the first place. Of course, there have been vague rumors and stories. We Are South Devon offered explanations ranging from the ghost of, quote, an escaped convict to a strange Dartmoor beast. They also cite rumors shared online, including a guest appearance from Bigfoot. We have to wonder where the rest of him went, and even ghosts tied to a long-destroyed Bronze Age village. Other rumors they'd encountered included the hands belonging to a gunpowder factory worker who died in, yes, a gunpowder factory explosion. Some even say that they belong to an early victim of the road itself. It's not as fun, as South Devon pointed out, to mention that the road is narrow and that the light there isn't great, even now, in 2024. And, even more mundanely, the BBC reported that, quote, many suggest it's all down to the grockles trying to drive narrow, high-walled roads far too fast. We wondered what a grockle is, and you will be thrilled to learn that it's pretty much what it sounds like, a vaguely insulting term for a tourist or a visitor to the area. Of course, some of the original accidents did involve locals, but there is another explanation for that: the issue of the road itself. The Time Travel Britain blog describes the problem as an adverse camber. This did not clear anything up for us at all, so we turned to the Cycling Association of Great Britain for help. According to them, an adverse camber is, quote, a road design feature that involves the road's surface sloping away from the inside of a bend, being higher on the inside of the bend than on the outside, the opposite of a banked corner. Apparently, some European roundabouts include this feature to actually help slow down traffic. The Haunted Devon blog claims that the local council made repairs to the road sometime after the spate of accidents in the 1920s, which would explain why there haven't been continuous issues in the area, or nonstop hairy hands. Statistics also tell us that back in the 1920s, driving was more dangerous than it is today. That might be hard to imagine, but it is true. According to the National Safety Council, quote, in 1923, the first-year miles driven was estimated, the motor vehicle death rate was 18.65 deaths for every 100 million miles driven. Since 1923, the mileage death rate has decreased 93% and now stands at 1.33 deaths per 100 million miles driven. Those are American stats, but it's a pretty comparable situation to the UK. Driving, whether motorcycles or cars, was a fairly new pursuit in both countries. As USHistory.org pointed out, the 1920s are called the age of the automobile because it's the decade vehicles became truly accessible to a larger portion of the population. New drivers, new problems. It makes sense to us. But logic or no logic, the hairy hands have stuck around. It's the levels of weirdness, we think, that are attractive. Like, why are the hands hairy? Aren't disembodied hands frightening enough on their own? Are paranormal enthusiasts and folklore fans gilding the lily here? Maybe they are. But really, when you break down any of the great urban legends, they don't make a whole lot of sense. Really, it's more about the metaphor and what it says about our hopes and our fears. Cars and motorcycles are dangerous things, and our sense of control over them is perhaps shakier than we would like. In the 1920s, that truth was closer to the surface than ever. So would it be so hard, really, to believe in a pair of invisible, or even real, hands gripping the wheel, taking away your authority? It's something to think about, strangers, while we're sitting in that next traffic jam, inching our way toward the next destination, and the next, and the next. We hope you'll join us next time for another premium exclusive episode of One Strange Thing. Oh, and if you wouldn't mind, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on your favorite app. It helps us find more listeners. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.